Are you warm enough?
I am. Yeah, I've been shoveling and spreading salt all day. It's pretty cold here where I'm at. You're in. Are you out
Just
west? You're in
Pacific
California.
Northwest. I'm in Olympia, Washington,
Okay, all right.
or
I'm in
outside
Ohio,
of.
so it's all
Yeah,
snow and ice here.
yeah.
So,
You guys in your purple states. Things are always changing, switching up.
I know, man.
Well,
We pretend that
lawn
we love it.
work. Oh, really? Do you guys have statewide scheduled trainings for cognitive dissonance with regards to the weather?
Yeah, it's the Midwest states kind of get a bad rap, but I think the reason why most people come back to them is just because they're such good, wholesome places to have a family, low cost of living, good people here, and so I've lived most of my life here. I always kind of intended to kind of go off and be somewhere else at some point, but got married and had kids and thought, well, shoot, this is the best place to be. So,
Where did you go to uni, or did you forego that?
yeah, no, I got my undergrad. I did my undergrad at Bowling Green State University here in Ohio. Went for flight technology and operations, so I was a pilot.
Oh,
And yeah, I've had kind of a wild career. I'm not like a comedian or a trained writer. This is all kind of something that happened. It's yeah. Maybe we'll talk about the journey, but it's been a little crazy.
what's your favorite flying device?
Well, I've only ever flown a Cessna 172 and a Piper Arrow, kind of like what you typically train in when you're learning how to fly.
Okay.
And they're very safe planes. A Cessna is they're so stable they're almost impossible to put in a spin or stall. You can kind of take your hands off the yoke and they just fly. They're so well designed. So very safe plane to fly in.
Hmm.
So, so yeah, have we already started? Are we jumping in now or
Depends on the
how do you,
guest. Some people like to
okay.
jump in. Some people like to tease me. Okay, it's all my fault.
So tell me about you. I only know about you from kind of your Twitter, personality.
Oh,
I just enjoy following you and I enjoy what you tweet. So what's your
follow.
story?
My story? Well, there's a number of different layers to it, but my
Yeah.
political journey
Uh-huh.
began at the Evergreen State College when I was a washed up 36-year-old preschool teacher and failed novelist. And
Uh-huh.
I wanted to get accreditation because I thought that the academy was about getting accredited, like really
Yeah.
getting that you get a degree, you're part of the elite class now, you have some clout, then you can start to make your way in life. And
Right.
where I ended up going, the Evergreen State College has an alternative model of education, which was really good for me, my brain,
Mm-hmm.
my work style, and really focused on independent learning. I was
Okay.
older. I'd already worked in the world, but I was surrounded by, 19, 20-year-olds in a different generation.
Okay.
Those Gen Zs, maybe tail end of the Gen Zs, or the
Yeah.
beginning of the Gen Zs, or end of the millennials. Like things started to
Okay.
change in 2014,
Oh yeah.
2015 while I was
Yeah.
at college. And then in 2017, well, after the Donald Trump inauguration, the
Mm-hmm.
college, which had already been going full bore,
Mm-hmm.
hyper progressive, what people call woke,
Yeah.
they had already set everything in motion to make the college about equity.
Okay.
And so a lot of things don't jive with equity. Equity
Yeah.
has a certain totalitarian or like all-consuming
Mm-hmm.
kind of ethos to it. Everything
Mm-hmm.
has to be about equity. That's what
Yep.
equity is, whatever
Yep.
equity is. And everybody's got a different version of it, but if you watch how it runs. So it had already become the main focus of the college to be about social justice, equity, and et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing trainings, and everybody's getting on board with this. And then Donald Trump gets elected, and people go into panic because
Mm-hmm.
the interesting thing about this ideology, and this is why I think it happens at college campuses and why it happened in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
is that it establishes it conditions a certain reaction to a certain stimulus, and it's a group reaction to a certain stimulus.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it's really interesting because my political awakening kind of happened when I came back from the military and I went to college. I was a little older of a college student like yourself. So I was in the military and kind of I started to think about, well, I went overseas. I was deployed to Iraq and I started having these thoughts like, oh my goodness, like how does a country get to be like this? And how do we have it so good in America? You know, it was really just such an eye-opening experience, that by itself. And then I came back. I went to university in 2010 is when I went. And I was probably, maybe a little older than senior age as a freshman. So I was kind of an old college student. And but what kind of triggered me with what you said is a response to a stimulus. My sociology course that I was required to take, and then my ethnic studies course, the school required you to take at least one ethnic studies course, which was classic, woke dogma is what it essentially was. And I did notice how you would be the way the teachers taught, they'd almost program you to respond to certain words. You would hear a trigger word, or you would hear a certain name, and immediately it's like classic religious fundamentalism. It's like this is the bad stuff. If you hear someone using this word, they are one of the bad people. If you hear someone citing a person like this, they are one of the bad people. And there was no logical thought behind it. And so that with my ethnic studies course, it was interesting. It was focused on Native American studies, is the one I ended up taking. And I became obsessed with trying to respond to a lot of what my teacher was saying in class. I went down this huge rabbit hole because a lot of what he was saying didn't make sense to me. It didn't seem to add up. So I wanted to find out more. And I had to go outside the peer review kind of system. I started learning about the peer review stuff because he would only let us cite peer-reviewed papers, peer-reviewed studies in our classroom discussions.
That's convenient.
Yeah, exactly. It's a racket, and so as we were learning about the condition of Native Americans in the United States, I decided to go outside the peer review system and go to interviews with tribal elders and people, modern Native American Indians who are living on the reservation and who are offering real strong critique of the reservation system and the Bureau of Indian Affairs and all the stuff that you would never hear in the peer-reviewed system, which was essentially, neo-Marxist doctrine. And my teacher hated me, but that was kind of my political awakening because I couldn't believe one that people were paying for this stuff, the stuff that he was saying.
Well, they weren't paying for it; they were paying for the credit.
They were paying for the credit,
scam.
yeah.
Wow.
But it really is. It's an all-encompassing worldview, and it affects how you see mankind, how you see politics,
history, the individual.
history, everything.
Right.
The individual, absolutely, and so that's kind of that was all the way back in 2010. So that's really before things really started changing a lot, But still, I mean, the what we now call wokeness, it was definitely there. It was definitely present. I mean, it's been in the universities for decades, right? So, anyway, I'm sorry I went off on that whole tangent, but
No.
when you said responding to stimulus, I just remember that. I remember that feeling and that effect that they would almost they would bring up. They might mention the other side or the other argument, and they wouldn't address it or debunk it. They would just say, "These people are bad. These people are Nazis. These people are extremists." don't listen to them, stay away from them, which only made me want to understand more. What are they hiding from us?
Did you begin to travel down a study of this dogma, this doctrine, or did you just kind of let it
Yeah,
you just started paying attention to it?
I started paying attention to it, and it didn't really come up again. I think for me, I got a job. I got a job in sales and logistics, and I had a family, I had kids, and you kind of move on with life. And it's like, well, that was wild in college. I'm glad I never have to think about that again. But then the George Floyd thing happened, 2 years ago, and we suddenly had this. I'm an evangelical Christian, and this thing happened in the evangelical world, where a lot of evangelical leaders suddenly started to say a lot of the same things that I remember my ethnic studies teacher in college saying. A lot of these, buzzwords or
mantras,
the mantras, talking about things like, systems, dismantling systems of inequity, intersectionality, collective guilt. That was a big one. I think the biggest kind of, oh shoot, I need to start paying attention to this moment for me was a prominent evangelical pastor named Tim Keller. He preached a sermon in which he attempted to give a biblical basis for collective guilt and why we should be able to say that a generation can be held accountable for the sins of their ancestors. And I was like, wow, that's where's this coming from? So I started.
And why would you question that, other than your privilege and your fragility?
That's a good question.
Unless you accept that it is your fragility that is causing you to question.
Yeah, it is. I think that I was able to question it because I had kind of already been down that rabbit trail in college. Like I had read primary source materials, and I'd kind of debated with some of these these woke professors, and to suddenly hear pastors and preachers talking like this, I was like, oh, what happened? I think so I went back and I read a few primary books on critical theory. I think one of the books I read was I didn't read through it, but I read a lot in it. I didn't read it cover to cover like a novel, but the Gender and Race anthology by what's her name? Let's see, Gender and Race. Race, Class, and Gender, an anthology. It's by Margaret Anderson and Patricia Hill Collins. And I read through it, listened to a lot of commentary on it, and that kind of helped ground me into what this critical theory was. And once you understand what it is, you see how it's affecting so many different pieces of our culture. Everything down to the way people would talk, the way people would talk about their experience, as a black person, blah blah blah, as a white person, blah blah blah. I can't say anything about your experience as a black person because I'm white. I can't say anything about your experience as a white person because I'm black. Once you know about critical theory, you realize where that comes from. Okay. that kind of moral relativism, that the idea of speaking your truth as opposed to speaking the truth.
It's very it's grounded in perspectivalism, I think is one word. One fancy word,
perspectivalism, standpoint epistemology. And
how would that capture the evangelical Christian imagination? How does that interact?
Yeah, so I think what happened was there was a lot of I think there was a huge emotional reaction to George Floyd. And Christians, I think naturally, I mean, the thing that is wonderful about Christians is we want to love our neighbor. We want to, we want to show kindness to our neighbor. We want to, bring Jesus. We want to bring the good news of Jesus to the world. We want to build the kingdom of God, and I think there was this feeling that with George Floyd and everything that was going on in the country, that Christians had failed in some way. That if Christians had been doing their job in the United States for the last 200 years, how did we get here? What have we missed? And I think that's a valid question to ask. I think that there was some serious soul searching going on. But what I think happened was a lot of progressive theologians, neo-Marxist academics, kind of seized on that feeling that a lot of Christians were having, and inserted their own talking points into it. And said, okay, yeah, of course you're feeling guilty because you're part of a racist system that has been perpetuated since the founding of this country, and Christianity has been a part of that. And if you want to love your neighbor, and you want to be a good, godly Christian, and you want to reach the world for Jesus and bridge those racial divides in our country, then here's what you need to do. Here's what your Bible hasn't been telling you. Here's what your pastor hasn't been telling you, and then that's where the sociology comes in, and you'd have pastors inviting sociologists from their local university to come do a panel discussion about race relations, and they didn't and it was all the same stuff, and
so it's not you're not objecting to the racial reconciliation, the honest look at American history,
right?
The owning the mistakes of these different groups and these different historical forces. It's principally there's something that you question about the way that this model of the world wants to ostensibly resolve these issues. There's something about this critical theory steeped ideology that it's like, there's something there that's not. And so if that's the case, then could you describe positively where you're coming from before you reject the woke? You're rejecting the woke on the basis of another value set. And what is that value set? And to what degree is it evangelical Christian informed? To what degree is it,
I think
founding fathers, patriotism, or whatever?
Yeah, I think ultimately critical theory, or you could also call it liberation theology in the church, or neo-Marxism, whatever.
That sounds succulent.
I think it's ultimately a philosophy of materialism. Okay. As a Christian, I believe that human beings are made in God's image, that we are of infinite worth. We have free will. Each one of us is unique, and our value is innate and inerrant. And I think a materialist or an atheist, what have you, in my opinion, has a harder time finding basis for human dignity and human worth than a Christian does. I mean, it's okay. For us, it's grounded and rooted in the fact that we're made in God's image, I think that this other philosophy, critical theory, what have you, it's an attempt to find a way to protect human dignity without God, and in order to do that, you need materialist means. You need to whether it's power dynamics, money. You need other ways to measure,
the sanctity of human life.
The sanctity of human life.
Or even just the sanctity of sanctity. Because there's no sanctity, I guess.
Right.
I guess a humanist foundation. They can make an argument about the potential that is in the human being to do all these things, like the ability of the human being to make meaning, to cooperate, to wield power for good or evil. There's a bunch of potential power within the human being that just, I guess, just is inherently respected or inherently sacrosanct in some way. The Christian answer is that there's this narrative that's transcendent, and then you have to figure out, well, to what degree does all this stuff meaning matter, and what is God, and all these theological questions then have to be resolved that you don't have to resolve in atheism, but the atheism, you find it to be squishy or prone to
I think
some sort of derogatory
well,
draft.
I think, because I mean, if pure rationality led us to, what we saw in the early 20th century with racial eugenics, the horrific mistakes we made around segregation and race was ultimately rooted in this kind of this Darwinist idea that, we are all there is. We're animals. We came from a single cell, and if there is no God and we're not accountable to some kind of higher moral power, then why not practice eugenics? I mean, why not try to make our gene pool as pure and as resilient to disease and smart in order to produce all kinds of technological advances, that it was seen, all throughout the late 19th and early 20th century, it was seen as like the primary mode of for the betterment of mankind, and I don't see anything in pure, I don't see anything in a godless world, a world without any kind of transcendent moral lawgiver where something like eugenics would be wrong. I can't find a
guilt.
Or group guilt. Yeah. So I think I don't know. I'm actually curious about how this idea, this critical theory came about, but it almost strikes me as a reaction to kind of the modernism that led to eugenics. It's a way to avoid going back there without accepting the premise of a God or a transcendent moral lawgiver to whom you're accountable. It's a reaction to it, but it's not. It's introducing problems of its own almost.
So, if in your estimation, critical theory is based on a materialist as opposed to a transcendental worldview or a worldview based on God, how does that then change the church, specifically the evangelical church, to have critical theory interpreting the message of the Bible?
Yeah, well, I think the way a lot of Christians who have been a little more warm to critical theory, the way they would say it is that critical theory, it's not our religion, it's not in the Bible. It's just a tool. It's a tool that we use to better understand our reality.
It's a hermeneutic.
Exactly. Exactly. And they would even say that critical theory doesn't give us the answers. Our answers are still in the Bible. The answers to the problems in the world are still found in the gospel. But I think when you use that hermeneutic, it has a serious corrupting influence in the way you see the Bible. The word justice, for example, appears all throughout the Bible. I mean, God talks about justice and how much he values justice and how he is a just God. But depending on how you're defining justice, you're going to come to those passages of Scripture and read them very differently, right? There's the critical theory view of justice, and there's what we would consider the traditional view of justice. And that's going to lead you to two very different conclusions, depending on how you're going into it. So I I think, I don't know. I think Christians, out of our earnestness to try to do the right thing and love our neighbor, I think we tend to jump on bandwagons a lot. Sometimes cultural waves will come and we see, ooh, here's this new movement that we if we want to remain relevant and we want to
80s Christian hair metal, man. What was up with that?
Striper, remember that?
I remember Petra. I actually listened to them quite
a bit. But I think Christians, it seems like we always fall into those, I think this is just kind of the latest one. I remember my dad, he used to listen to an old Bible program, in the 70s and 80s, and on this program they'd talk about how maybe you shouldn't have so many kids, because you remember back in the 70s there was this huge scare about overpopulation. We're all going to die. There's going to be a huge famine because of overpopulation, and Christians fell for that back then too. So. I've always been very wary of cultural movements, and I tend to be kind of a contrarian naturally, I guess.
Okay. So if your church theologian tells you to have 2 kids, you're going to have 18. But if you're Catholic, you only have 1.
Way, so
wow!
I'm already on my way there for sure.
Congrats! Wow.
Yeah, thanks, man. So. It's the George Floyd thing kind of kicked off this renewed interest into wokeness for me and this whole philosophy. So that eventually led to the kind of the book that we wrote, the little satirical guide to wokeness that we did with the Babylon Bee. And I had a lot of fun with that. It was nice to lighten up a little bit after a lot of hand wringing and worrying about the state of the world.
Well, that is a problem with all the pills out there. There's this great cabinet of pills. There's a blue pill and a red pill and a white pill and a black pill and a top pill if you're or a mauve pill if you're really high class hipster, but with regard to having a faith in Christ Jesus or in God, that can be very helpful for people who are confronted by concerning things, whether within their life or in their society. And that could be a way to not completely take the black pill, as it's called.
Yeah.
But then there's also practices that you can do to, like you said, like kind of loosen up the hand-wringing, lighten up the room, as it were. Pastors are famous for pastor jokes. My dad was just in town. He was talking about how he was a preacher. He just retired, and he'd do these sermons. I was just talking about his process of making a sermon because I do live streams and there's kind of some overlap there. And he was just talking about his process of getting a sermon down and how he'd do it. But he would feel and be in a kind of a communion with the room as a performer, I guess. And he would feel things getting too heavy. And then it was like, okay, well, I need to lighten things up. Yeah, get people to laugh, and then we go back to the serious topic. So there is within at least pop culture preacherdom, like there's humor is important. Babylon Bee, you guys are a manifestation of that kind of that thing. So it could be the case, and there's some really silly Atlantic hit piece on you guys. I think it was the Atlantic,
I remember that
where I think that some people in the very pious woke establishment, they have a problem with humor on one level, but then they think, well, aren't you supposed to be Christian? How is your humor standing up to loving your neighbor and stuff? Are you not being satirical? I mean, literally, like you're pouring acid into the conversation. So
that's a good question. I get that question a lot about even from other Christians. How do you reconcile what you do with your beliefs as a Christian? And so there's a few things I say to that.
Is there a snarky Christ somewhere written about in like Luke 4?
Absolutely,
4?
Absolutely, yeah. So. I think there's kind of 2 prongs to what we do. I'll talk about them both briefly. The first one, obviously, the satirical stuff, which is mockery, sarcasm, ridicule. I think that plays an important part in the culture, and the way we see ourselves fitting into that is we are there to mock bad ideas and mock proud people. I think I think that there's a tradition a proud tradition of that in Christianity. You look at the
A
Old
proud
Testament.
tradition of mocking the proud.
Oh yeah, I mean the Old Testament prophets. I love the passages where Isaiah would tell the idol worshippers, "Hey, make sure you nail your idol down because a horse might walk by and vibrate the ground a little bit, and your little idol will fall over." Or Elisha mocking the prophets of Baal. Maybe your God is sitting on the toilet and he can't hear you. Even Jesus. Jesus he had strong words for the religious leaders of the time. He called them a whitewashed tombs, a brood of vipers. One of my favorite examples when he talked about the rich, he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven, which is, it's hyperbole. I imagine if you lived in that culture and maybe there was jokes around the eye of a needle, which was a gate in the wall to Jerusalem at the time. Maybe there was some context that we're missing here 2,000 years later, but that almost reads like a Babylon Bee headline to me, that it's easier for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. And so I think there's,
and then you have a photo of AOC with that tax the rich dress on. It's easier.
Exactly.
It's easier for a progressive to walk into a champagne socialist event than to get into Kingdom of Heaven.
That's right. So it's I think one of the important roles of satire is to remind everyone that our leaders, that our elites, that our betters are not gods, that they are fallible, that they're human beings just like us, that they're just as prone to slip on a banana peel and do a pratfall like a Three Stooge as we are, and also to ridicule bad ideas, bad philosophies, which we've done with wokeness and things like that. So that's kind of the satire side of it. The other side, just in pure humor and just the ability to make people laugh. I think there's kind of two types of Babylon Bee jokes. Some are a little more savage and pointed and meant to be more satire, dry satire, and some will elicit a belly laugh. And I think that's also very important too, because it's for one, it's unifying. Our culture is very polarized. Shared laughter is very hard nowadays because I think we have two different countries with two different that are operating off of two different worldviews, two different premises, which makes shared laughter at a joke difficult, because you kind of have to have some base of agreement on what reality is to get a joke, which is meant. Jokes are meant to touch on truth in a way, in a humorous way that makes you laugh. But when you can tell a joke that tells the truth and that is clever enough to elicit laughter on both sides, that's always really rewarding. And I love those moments when we do have leftists and progressive who will write us and reach out to us saying that they a particular headline or joke that we've told really made them laugh, even though they didn't agree with it. Same thing on the right. When we turn our cannons and make fun of the right or make fun of Christians, when those people can laugh at the joke, there is a sense of, like you said, it's disarming. You're kind of reminding everybody that we're all a little ridiculous. We're all pretty silly. As highly as we often think of ourselves and as smart as we often fancy ourselves to be, we're all pretty dumb, and we all make really stupid mistakes. And when you're kind of willing to be the first one to be the fool, and let everyone know that it's okay to admit that about yourself too. It's a good thing. So it's getting harder and harder to do in this day and age, but it's an important function of what we do.
Well, it's an opportunity. It's a market opportunity in the very least, on the attention market.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about one aspect of what we refer to as the woke is that it does have probably using this word wrong, kind of an evangelicalness to it. It really
Yes.
wants to spread. It wants to spread the
Yes.
good word, or at least
Yes.
point out the bad word. And so you're an evangelical. Babylon
Yeah.
Bee's Christian. So is there not some sort of evangelical, like you guys are scheming somewhat? How do we lead people to Christ through humor? Is that not kind of a moral imperative to what degree is it a moral imperative to
Yeah.
bring people to Christ? And if that is so, what would Christ be in that for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, that for Christians, that's a moral imperative for each one of us. I think there are kind of two schools of thought at the Babylon Bee among me and our editor-in-chief, Kyle, our owner, all the writers. I think, you can be a Christian that sees everything you do as mission, including writing jokes. It is all meant to point to the mission and lead people to Christ. And I think there's there's kind of another school of thought that is more, we as Christians, good Christian humor should just look like good humor, not necessarily with an agenda meant to point people in a certain direction or reach people. I think that's the difference between good art and bad art. If your art has an agenda, you've kind of already failed at making art.
The woke would say everything is already always ideology.
Well,
So.
yeah, that's right. That's the water we swim in, and but that's why a lot of Christian movies are bad, because we feel the need to shoehorn the message into literally every frame and every line of dialogue, and I think. You
don't think Kirk Cameron could make a better Lord of the Rings remake than Amazon? Is that what you're...
Oh boy, yeah. Well, at this point, I would probably go with Kirk Cameron after what I've been seeing the last few days. But I think.
Well, it's possible to have a mission without being dogmatic about it.
Yes.
If you can frame what you mean the mission is, if you can frame what Christ is in such a way that Christ can be found everywhere and in everything you do, and you're in, it's always an expression of your relationship of Christ. If you can define Christ as something that's not so broad that it doesn't have any meaning, or he is so broad that he doesn't have any meaning, but he's still strong enough, powerful enough to inform everything, then you might be able to say, well, this is a part of the work of what
Absolutely.
I believe. So if
Making
that
things
is
that
the
are-
case, what would Christ be for you?
Well, when it comes to what I do every day, I see myself as glorifying Jesus by always trying to make things that are good, true, and beautiful. Things that accurately reflect the world that he made as it is. I think, with comedy, there's kind of a deconstructionist, element to comedy where you're kind of pointing out the absurdity in things, where I think our approach to it is we want to do that, but we do want to take it a step further, in the sense that we hope that we are pointing to something greater. We're not just showing the absurdity of everything, then leaving everyone in that place. We hope that there's a joy or a jovialness that comes through in our comedy. We hope that there's a sense of hope that comes through in our comedy. I think we always try to have that this perspective in front of us that, going back to the hand wringing, as we wring our hands about the state of our culture and the state of politics and our country and our freedoms and things like that, having the perspective as Christians that we serve a king who will always be on the throne, and we are a part of a kingdom that will never be overthrown, a spiritual kingdom. We can see kingdoms and movements rise and fall all day, and we won't be moved because our heart's in a different place. And so we try to keep that perspective. I think that's what keeps us from despairing. Is what seems like the world is kind of falling apart. You look at what's happening in Canada and the kind of the there's just the devolving of our political system here in America, and our freedoms. Yeah, there's a lot that you could despair about. And we hope that our joy and the fun that we're having and what we're doing, even while we're ridiculing, points to people who observe it to something or to the source of our hope.
Ironically, you're a bunch of Christians who are fiddling while Rome burns. Then finally got Nero in the back, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, it's kind of it almost is. It's like my buddy, one of my favorite commentators, Andrew Klavan, always talks about laughing our way through the fall of the Republic. There is that sense of, I think, there's nothing wrong with having kind of a tragic view of life. That reality is full of death and injustice and defeat, and that is going to be the way of things. We may not necessarily be on the upswing here. I mean, we may be headed, for all I know, we may be headed for 100 years, 1,000 years of darkness. And that's, on one hand, that's really sad. But on the other hand, like I said, we have this unchanging and eternal source of hope that we know who, as Christians in our beliefs, we know who wins in the end. We know who comes out on top and who ultimately will be on the right, quote unquote, the right side of history, to borrow from the other side there. And so there's a tremendous amount of peace that we can have with that, and we can know that even if what we do doesn't have any effect or any immediate effect in the culture or move the needle one way or the other in the direction that we want, we just simply enjoy that we are able to be here to have fun while speaking the truth, regardless of whether or not it produces our desired effect. We are glorifying God just in doing that, and I think that gives us a sense of kind of just, we can kind of, from there we can sit back, we can relax, and we can have fun with it, and leave the rest, leave the big picture of it up to God.
Is having fun one of the hidden fruits of the Spirit? I don't remember that one in the
I think
Pauline passage.
It's love, joy, peace, patience. Joy, peace, joy and peace. I think that is something that's two qualities that are sorely lacking in our world. Is joy and peace. I mean, not just fleeting happiness, not just hedonistic pleasure seeking, but true, like, deep down joy, and being able to have a sense of peace even when things aren't going the way you want them to go. So I think from there G.K. Chesterton said the test of a good religion is whether or not you can laugh at it. So if you have a certain security or peace in your worldview, in your beliefs, you can kind of relax a little bit. Yeah, you don't have to worry about the attacks or the ridicule. If kind of the way we see things at the Babylon Bee is, we make fun of ourselves, we make fun of Christianity a lot, and we challenge everyone else. Can your worldview hold up to our ridicule, the way ours can? So.
Because they're a bunch of bastards. We bust our own balls. Why can't? What are yours made out of? Right? Ours are brass. What was it like going from flying airplanes to logistic stuff to satire? Like, was there like a kind of a change, or was it just fluid mindset?
I could say that I am doing what I always was meant to do. This has always been in me. I've always thought about this stuff, for a long time.
Were you one of those guys in youth group that would in the back like making up like the alternative lyrics to the songs that everybody was singing? Because I was one of those guys.
I was always the guy kind of like I would even make tapes. I would like make little satirical tapes of some of the church stuff. I even when I was in the military, I used to make little comics making fun of our chain of command, our first lieutenant and platoon sergeant, and they'd get passed around, because I'd just be like written down on things. And I remember our platoon sergeant found some of these things. The whole platoon gets punished because I'd been writing this stuff, So it's kind of always been there. I think even when I was in logistics and sales, I kind of got this reputation as being this guy that would think, I would have people come into my office and say, hey, my daughter is in high school and she said that she thinks that she might be non-binary. And I have no idea what to say to her. Can you tell me what to say to her? So like I would always talk with coworkers about this kind of stuff, and I really enjoy thinking about it. And so what I'm doing at the Bee felt like such a natural, just really falling into what I was meant to do all along. I really feel fortunate that I did fall into it. I can't imagine. I mean, if I was still in supply chain logistics today, I would still have that nagging feeling that I was in the wrong place and that I was not living up to my full potential. So I praise God for that. It's a true mercy that he let me be here.
What is what's your writing process? What is the writing process? I'm just curious about that because I'm in the similar line of work. I mean, just for example, every episode I try to come up with a clever title, and so I just like I walk around the house. Do you guys have do you have a process? Some things that work better, some things that work worse. Do you have inklings of a formula on how to get the best zinger out there?
Well, the satire writing process is a lot different than what I would say for what we did with the Wokeness book, and then me and Kyle have a novel coming out in a few months that
is it like left or right behind or something, like woke behind or something?
No, it's called the Postmodern Pilgrim's Progress, and we sold it to the publisher as a mashup of John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So it's It's like a Christian allegory with wormholes and aliens.
Sounds like a movie.
Yeah. So when it comes to the Babylon Bee writing process, though, it's very we have to be very of the moment. In order to get traffic to the site, it's always helpful to be able to jump on what people are talking about, what's trending on Twitter, what's the big news story that day. So, I'm on the East Coast time. Most of the creative team is out on the West Coast. And so I'm waking up earlier than all of them. I'm kind of getting a sense for what's going to be the conversation today. What are the 3 or 4 big news stories in this week's cycle? And I'm kind of breaking that down early in the morning. And then I'll put together a list of here are the main topics we want to hit on. I'll kind of send out the marching orders to our writers. We have 7 or 8 part-time writers kind of all around the country. We have a shared Slack channel that we work in. And once we kind of know what generally we want to talk about, it's just a volume game. Pitch as many times as you can. Okay. Get the crud out. Clean the pipes. So we get all our bad ideas out. And for every one headline we publish, there might be 40, 50 headlines that end up in the trash because it's you have to just do that much in order to get the gold. Usually after I'm sending out the bulletin to the writers, what I'll do is I'll go outside and kind of just walk around, try to be quiet for a little bit. I look around at objects. A lot of our comedy is just like mashing up things, mashing up a current event with some silly object in your living room or something you watched on TV last night, and just kind of mashing those up together in creative ways is a good source for a lot of it. So usually I'm looking around the room. I'm looking out at my backyard. I just kind of get lost a little bit, and usually, the pitches will start to come that way. When it came to writing a novel, it was a very weird process because Kyle Mann's the editor-in-chief, him and I wrote it together. So I don't know if anyone has done this before, like two people writing a novel together, separated by, thousands of miles. But we were very, we outlined the whole thing in a very detailed way before we started writing. So we knew where all the story beats were. We kind of followed a very classic, storyline structure, as you would with a movie or a screenplay. Kind of the classic hero's journey idea. We got down all our beats. We ahead of time figured out exactly what we wanted in each of those beats, and then we just, okay, I'll take this chapter, you take that chapter. And luckily, Kyle and I are similar enough in kind of our writing style and sensibilities that it worked very well. So I don't know, I wouldn't recommend that to everybody, but I do like the idea of outlining ahead of time. I think once you have the outline down, it does give you a kind of a sense of freedom to work within those boundaries, and then you can go off and do your your more artistic stuff. But it does help to have the structure in ahead of time. It helps the novel to it keeps it from getting bogged down. It keeps the pacing nice and tight. But yeah,
going from somebody who's thinking about culture and being one among many to participating in a kind of a cultural cornerstone right now. I mean, you guys are pretty big.
So weird.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So you were going from, just kind of watching these things, thinking these things through to writing and having fun while doing it. But now that you guys are now that you're something, I mean, you guys even have like Elon Musk on your podcast, right? Like
oh my gosh.
It's kind of there's a odd thing that happens, but that changed I'm sure that changed your point of view. That brought you into dialogue with the culture. You're now having a dialogue with the culture. You're having some sort of influencer. There's a circuit there. So I'm wondering, like, what have you seen from this perspective, from all the letters that you receive and watching the traffic go back and forth? How has that changed what you think of, let's just say, about America or just about this moment in our time?
That's interesting. It is weird. I'm not sure if I've fully gotten my head around like how big the Babylon Bee is or how influential it is. I mean, to me, it still very much feels like I'm sitting
scrappy
here.
Upstart. Well,
yeah, it does. I mean, I'm sitting here in my laundry room writing jokes, and I'm just having a blast doing it. There's a lot that you don't get a sense for the size of the crowd as you're looking at your Twitter feed. But when I give a speech or I go to a convention and you see, 1,000 Babylon Bee fans, and that you suddenly get a sense for, like, holy cow, like, people actually, I'm putting this stuff out there and people are actually reading it. Like, like I'm still not sure if I've gotten my head around it. I do think, your question was, how has it changed the way we see America or see the culture? I think what it's done is I think it's really exposed, and the Babylon Bee is not only responsible for this. I'd credit some other comedians right now with this as well, but I think it's really exposed the fact that I think mainstream America is more united on a lot more things than we think. If you were just to look at cable news or read what comes up on Twitter, I think media and social media has made us look a lot more polarized than we are. And I'm always shocked when I go out in the world and when I speak with people, when I meet fans, many of whom are center left, even leftists, or kind of just not politically engaged at all, religious, not religious, who love the Babylon Bee. And it's encouraging to me. I've seen the kind of the support that has been shown to people like Dave Chappelle after his whole, his trans jokes, and seeing what Bill Maher's doing now, seeing the the incredible popular support that Joe Rogan has. I think there's a real craving out there for people who are not so much given to an ideology as they are just given to the pursuit of truth. I've really enjoyed seeing how, we've found common cause with people like, James Lindsay, who's an atheist. Like he thinks most of the stuff that I believe he thinks is total crap, but we found common cause together because we both love the truth and we care about pursuing the truth and speaking the truth, even if maybe we come to different conclusions in some ways. I think most of America is like that. And I think what the Bee has done, what other people are doing, has I think kind of exposed how reasonable and how smart people are, So I don't know. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a rambling answer, but it's been encouraging. It's been an encouraging thing.
I'm going to pitch you a tweet, something about like there's this silent majority that you guys are causing to laugh, and they're no longer silent during those moments. And there's different ways that you can get that majority to announce themselves. And it's much better to go the route of communication than it is, let's just say, protest or something like that. If you can alert the powers that be that their power is much more shaky than they have us and themselves believe by just through communication. You don't need to have a trucker march on Washington if you can say, listen, guys, it's not all your little bubble's not all it's cracked up to be. And so providing that alternative media gives not only you're fortunate to get all these eyes, all this attention that's not being served by the other media sources, but it's also showing these other media sources that, oh, wait, we don't have the reins as tightly as we thought.
Yes, and I think it's having the effect of giving people courage. I think so many the way the left is operating right now, or whatever you want to call it, they operate out of making you. They want to make you too afraid to speak the truth because of the consequences of speaking the truth. But the thing about laughter is it's kind of involuntary. If you laugh at something that's true, you may laugh at it because it's funny, whereas maybe you didn't otherwise you wouldn't speak up and articulate the truth yourself. But you can't help but laugh at something that's funny and true. And I think that like you kind of mentioned there that laughter, it's kind of undeniable when there are so many people laughing. On both sides, different ideological spectrum.
I think I have a picture of like a submarine's radar detector where you guys are sending out a signal and you're pinging this huge thing that's invisible, but you're sending out a signal and you're getting a signal back, and it's describing this mass through something like humor, which I think it's worrisome to the powers that be, but it's also it's better than revolution.
Yeah,
it's better than revolt.
Absolutely. Wouldn't you? I mean, I would love. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could accomplish what we want to accomplish with humor instead of, taking up arms?
Yeah.
But it reminds people
we should
that they're
get
not
Seinfeld
alone.
to go to Ukraine, man.
Yeah. No, I think reminding people that they're not alone, that they're not the only sane ones. I think that's a lot of feedback I get is, I thought I was the last sane person left on Earth. I thought the whole world had gone crazy, and I was like the only person who had my right mind still. And then I found the Babylon Bee, and then I got connected with all these other people who are laughing at these jokes, and I realized that I wasn't the only one. I wasn't alone, and that alone is very, very empowering. It gives you courage to maybe maybe take the next step and whether it's speaking out or doing more activist work, whatever that is. I think for many people the first step is just that laughter.
We talk about humor's the contours of humor and the different varieties of it. It can be very sharp. It can be really cruel. It can be really just silly. There's all these different ways to read a joke or to make a joke out of any given thing. And yet its relationship to sanity is really interesting. You brought that up, that people being able to read jokes shows them that there is a sanity there, which is, it's just odd because that which can, I think it goes back to what we were talking about, punching the balls of all these different ideologies. Sorry to bring that into a Christian discussion. I apologize for that. But that being able to laugh and to be laughed at shows a resilience, a mental fortitude that signals not just intelligence, but rationality in the sense of putting things into proportion. There's a ratio and bringing things back into proportion that humor accomplishes. That humor is just, it's weird. It's kind of it's a divine business. It's an angelic kind of thing. Not in the sense that God isn't, serious too, or the spiritual isn't serious too, but there's something about humor that does transcend a lot of things. It can get into cracks, kind of like the Holy Spirit in a way. It can it can walk through walls in ways that other things can't.
Well, one of our favorite I know I quote G.K. Chesterton a lot, but as a satirist and a writer, he's a big inspiration to what we do at the Bee. And one of the things he said was that truth can get in under the door while seriousness is still fumbling at the handle. And you're right, it does manage. It does kind of penetrate some of those cracks that otherwise would be impervious to to a think piece or anger or reason or rationality. It's really I like the word transcendent. The way you described it as transcendent. It is this very kind of beautiful shared acknowledgement of some sort of truth. I think it's a moment where things are aligned in such a way where you're kind of recognizing the divine order in a very subconscious way. So I don't know. It is weird. Humor is such a weird art / science. The headline, joke is a very specific kind of joke too. I mean, I could never do stand up. I mean, a lot of what I do in writing is it's very engineering type work. You're wordsmithing. You're shaving syllables off, and Jerry Seinfeld's very similar in his approach to writing jokes. Is very scientific about it, and we have to think about who is reading this. It's someone who's scrolling through their phone. We have to make sure that they're going to be able to quickly get the joke. If you have to read the headline twice, the joke's already lost. If you have to search through the Photoshop or the visual to try to figure out what's going on for a split second too long, the joke's already dead. It kind of has. You have to write it in such a way to where it grabs you and maybe either subverts or pulls the rug out from underneath you. That kind of 1-2 punch that you deliver in stand-up. You deliver it with by playing off the crowd. You have that comedic pause. You deliver the punchline. You don't have all those tools in writing written satire. So you kind of have to engineer the headline in a way to where it hits just perfectly. But I think it's the same. It's ultimately the same thing. You're pointing to a truth. You're doing it in a way that's maybe clever or unexpected, and just that shared acknowledgement of that truth is just really really fun for people. And it's created quite a community around the Bee. I mean, there's a lot of close knit groups of fans that have been connected. We even have a marriage that a couple fans married each other.
Okay, you guys should start a dating site for.
We've talked about that. Yeah. So it's pretty neat.
There's it's really interesting where we're at right now in history. It's just really, really interesting, and things could go really, really bad. Not that they haven't. And I don't know to what extent that this is concerning or not, but I remember a couple days ago, somebody shared on Twitter that the Biden, I think it's the Attorney General or some task force that they have, some very powerful agency that they have, has decried a war on information or misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. And that is something that is tearing the fabric of our society and decreasing trust in government. So we have to, and I don't know to what extent, like,
God
that's
forbid
something
we don't trust the government, right?
Well, and to a certain extent, we do want our intelligence things to be aware of that. But with this whole, like, the whole thing about with Rogan specifically, and even though you can look at that, was that a hit piece? You can analyze that all in these different ways. There's a inflection point of tension with this thing called information, malinformation, disinformation, misinformation, and what that is. And it's hilarious that I don't know how many times you guys have been fact-checked.
Yeah.
Like, it just keeps on happening. It's like, no, some expert somewhere fact checks this obviously satirical headline, which just asks all these questions about, are fact checkers not just information correctors? Is that what they're, or not information, but narrative? They're defending and upholding a narrative. And
absolutely.
The emperor has no clothes sort of thing is information warfare. On a certain level, you guys are playing the most dangerous game, which is information, which is belief. So I'm wondering, like, is there ethical things that are going on in your mind? I mean, you want the truth. You want the truth. They want the truth too. They just want the power too. So, but
right. Well, I guess on one hand, the fact that people writing silly comedy have become such a threat. That's a really bad sign. I mean, we're kind of the canaries in the coal mines, as comedians. That you ask anyone, who lived through Soviet Russia, that they'll tell you that the comedy was the last thing to die. That was kind of the last stand of truth. Where that was the comedians, and then when they came after the comedians, it was over. So we are, like you said, we are at kind of this inflection point, and I. So it has been an interesting experience. I mean, our first fact check came from Snopes, and it was a fact check of our joke that CNN has purchased an industrial-sized washing machine to spin the news before publication. It was
Wait, what? They fact checked,
and it was thorough too, man. It was like 5 pages long. They called CNN and verified that there is in fact no washing machine in the newsroom, and it's hilarious, right? I mean. On one hand, it's hilarious.
Were they in on the joke? Because it seems like they're in on the joke,
No, they were very serious. That's what made. I mean, the joke becomes so much funnier when the people reacting to it are so serious. It just makes it so much funnier. But as a result, Facebook sent us a notification that they were going to take down our page and demonetize us because we had shared misinformation. They at the time, Facebook was in a partnership with Snopes to do that. Fortunately, we had a big audience already at the time, and they raised a big stink, and so we were able to get that undone. I know a lot of smaller creators and pundits without that audience, they have no recourse like we did. Unfortunately, they just disappear, which is terrible. The fact checkers, I call them censorship launderers. They're really their function is to be launderers for a censorious intent. So I think my theory is that Facebook, if they want someone gone, they will send the fact checkers out to fact check them. And once there's a good bank of 7 or 8 fact checks against this particular creator, that gives them the kind of the excuse, if you will, to either completely deplatform them or invisibly suppress them in the algorithm, which Facebook has admitted they're doing this with, they call it their news ecosystem quality, or NEQ score. It's where how they judge things that in their words, things that are good for the world and things that are bad for the world. Facebook decides this, who's good and who's bad. The scores are invisible, and so if you have a bunch of fact checks against you, it affects your NEQ score. So it's kind of a way to and what happens is, a fact check might get then cited in the New York Times, and then Wikipedia can then refer to the New York Times citation, and they all reference each other, and it becomes laundered to where it gives it this look of authority and the look of being on the up and up, when it's really just it's all a racket, So there is that sense that we've we're constantly fighting against that. Our answer to that has been, well, for one, we're subscriber supported now, so that has helped us pay the bills as our traffic on social media has gone down. We are using all the kind of the off-brand, social media as well. But thankfully our stuff is still managed to poke through. I think just the power of the fan base and people liking it. People just love to share our stuff, and so it's still managing to make a difference. And I always tell people, whatever big tech ends up doing, I'm well aware that next month this could all be gone. Something big happens, and the Babylon Bee is deplatformed from everything. And you know what? At that point, we'll print it out on paper and we'll staple it to telephone poles across the country. I mean, we'll never stop doing it because we love doing it.
That's how the Onion started.
Yeah, right.
The internet.
Yeah, exactly right. Maybe there's a future in that. Maybe there's a future in going back. I think we actually even have a headline to that effect, that the Babylon Bee has invented some new innovative form of disseminating media called print, and now we have a print edition of the Babylon Bee. So, come what may. What's interesting though is I can't name any names, but I've had conversations with some people that are very high in big tech, who have said, we love the bee, and a bunch of people in big tech love the bee, and it's secret. They'll never admit it out loud, but it is weird. There's this kind of invisible fandom of the bee, that a whole segment of our audience that loves us and will never admit it, and you'll never know, which is fine with me. I mean, as long as they get enjoyment out of it, But it is really funny.
There's something weird. I mean, is there a parallel in United States history? I guess with McCarthyism and communist sympathies, everybody had to suppress, but there wasn't. It's just. Maybe we've been here before in this land of the free place where there's so much suppression and individual censoring, or self-censorship as it's called. And being able to be a resource for that makes your stuff more valuable, but it's still, it's not only are you making, you're pinging this silent majority, or this huge mass, by giving them something to laugh about and to speak about. So you're describing that, but you're also in negative showing that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the power structure, to get back into the systemic power thing. There is this systemic power structure, neoliberal elite managerial class with this thing, this garbled Marxist wokeness thing that's kind of this, but it's kind of this other thing that's kind of controlling people's thoughts. It's controlling people's thoughts. It's infiltrating every major thought production activity that we have, from church to the media, to entertainment, to the government, to policy, all that stuff. So it's, I don't know, not to get dark, but we are at a precipice. I don't know.
We are. I think.
How do you keep happy? You have a rosary? I guess you have Jesus, but how do you keep?
Right. Yeah, the Babylon Bee, where we get our name, it's a reference to the Babylonian exile of the Israelites. So, at the time that the book of, say, Daniel was written, the Babylonian Empire was the greatest empire that had ever existed on the face of the earth. They conquered Israel. They dragged away the brightest and smartest away from Israel, and they took them to Babylon to kind of teach them their ways and assimilate them, so to speak. And so there was kind of this sense of that the beauty of Israel and the kingdom that Yahweh had established was in tatters, and this other kingdom had come in and taken over, and these Israelites were taken as they were exiles in this foreign land, and as conservatives, as Christians, as just devotees to the truth, regardless of your religious affiliation or whatever, a lot of the times we feel like exiles in a foreign land, sane people in a world that's gone insane. Daniel, in the Bible, had the privilege of seeing the fall of the Babylonian Empire, and then the fall of the king that came after. He had this incredible perspective that enabled him to see, the greatest civilization that had ever existed falling, and then the prophecy that was revealed to him of Israel being restored in the future. All that to say, all what I'm trying to get at is, I think how we stay happy and where our hope comes from is that, kind of what I alluded to earlier, that our hope is in God, and the truth has its own voice, and the truth cannot be killed. It can be suppressed for a short time. It can be hidden for a short time, but the truth always manages to find a way back to the surface and assert itself on the world once again. And we kind of see this. I mean, we see this throughout history, these cycles of rising and falling and movements that kind of took the world by storm and then collapsed under the weight of their own, fallacies and inconsistencies. And what remains, what remains through that whole thread is what is true and what is good and what is beautiful. And if America falls, if our culture falls, if our government falls, what is true will never change, and what is good will never change. What is beautiful will never change. And at some point in the future, someone else will take up that torch and rebuild what was lost. You talk about, is there a precedent for this level of psychosis or mass delusion? I think so. I mean, you can look at even in the 20th century. I mentioned eugenics earlier. I think that I think Hitler served to shake the world out of that, and if he hadn't, I think it probably would have kept going. I mean, I think we would have had a lot more horrific things happen had Hitler not awakened everyone to the horror of what that philosophy led to. But
wait, did you just thank Hitler?
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Well, it's in. I mean, Hitler took that materialist, that kind of Darwinist philosophy to its logical conclusions, to its horrific logical conclusions, and in the way that only an insane person can do. You know what I mean? I mean, I think the ideologies are little self-contained little pods where everything kind of works and snaps together in a satisfying way, but they're a lot smaller than the whole truth and the way the world really works. And Hitler took this little ideology and he just took it to he just drove it all the way to its end. And I think that eventually will happen with wokeness. It's going to collapse under its own weight.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, it's going to have to. I don't know. I've charted the growth of it from a very tiny little liberal arts college in southwestern Washington through the government, through America. Right.
How long ago? When was that?
That the implosion at the Evergreen State College was in 2017, and it was spectacular. I'll send you my work on that matter. But the thing is that equity ideology was going to be implemented regardless of the voters. Like the voters didn't want that in government, and Inslee said, "No, we're going to keep on doing it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. The voters don't know what they want. We're going to do this." And Evergreen was at the lead of the kind of the flagship or the spearhead. It completely just collapsed under its own weight on this very small scale. But because the government was bigger than it, the government's kept it alive, and then the government's imported that ideology into the government. So to what degree it can collapse under its own weight? The question is, how far can it encroach into a system before the entire system crashes?
And how much damage will it do in the meantime, right?
Yes.
You know, I mean, yes, the Soviet Union collapsed, but the horrific tragedy that happened leading up to the collapse, that's
an open question, but
you know, I don't know. Yeah, that's a good. I go back and forth on this. I mean, I see signs for hope on some days, and then and then on other days it's like black pill day. You know, where
Well, I mean, just taking the evangelical church, is there? Are you aware of movements to have a kind of a reformed, non-woke congregations pop up or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there has been a strong reaction to it, and I've, this is maybe a little inside baseball, but there's been a very kind of loud and robust debate that's happened in the evangelical church over this topic and how we view the scriptures, how we view critical theory, and I've been very encouraged by the backlash against it, and I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to it. But like you said, you talked about how the system can take a bad idea that would normally collapse under its own weight, but the system can keep it alive and propagate it. Similar in the church. I mean, there's a group that a lot of the kind of the woke initiatives in these churches has come through. One group called Be the Bridge, it sells itself as a racial reconciliation organization, and they sell themselves as someone we want to help you learn how to bring the gospel to other races and to people that you normally don't come in contact with. But what they are, when you dig down into it, is they're really the same as all this other stuff. That they'll have the whiteness intensive classes, the white fragility, power systems, intersectionality, all that stuff. It's just the classic sociological wokeness with a little bit of Christianized language. And this organization has kind of been able to tunnel itself through a lot of these churches under the guise of something good, and root in that way. So there's a bit of a split happening. Again, nothing I'm worried about. If you look at church history, church history is full of splits and schisms.
What are you talking about? You guys are the most unified ideology the world has ever known. If you just kind of ignore the Protestant Reformation, you guys have been Catholic. Oh, and let's forget the Eastern Orthodox Church, too.
Yeah. Oh, no, we love the Protestant Reformation. What none of us like to talk about is what happened in the decades after the Protestant Reformation. It's so I think that the and again, I don't know how much this will resonate with your audience and listeners and things like that. But I go back to the scripture again. Jesus assures us as Christians that He will build His church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And there has been this weird thing that has happened, through the ages, and schisms and reformations and turmoil and corruption and churches just falling out. People falling out, losing their faith. It's amazing how Christianity has managed to survive and grow.
If you were able to speak outside of the terms of your faith and describe Christianity's robustness as an ideology, or as a memeplex, just continuing to persevere through history. What would you say is the quality that allows it to persist? What is the truth in it, or the sustenance that it brings to humankind that allows it to persist?
Yeah, well, I think that it addresses two very important human spiritual needs in a way that nothing else does, and that is the human need for justice and the human need for mercy and grace. I think, I think that we have, however you explain this, whether you explain it through evolution, that this is a something that evolved out of a need for survival, or whether you explain it through religious terms, I think none of us can deny that human beings have this innate sense of right and wrong, however you define that, or good, better, best, fair and unfair, and just and unjust. And I think for me, Christianity explains that phenomenon in the most satisfactory way. But if you just leave it there, it's a very dark and nasty place to be, because once you kind of get a sense of what's right and what's wrong, you suddenly realize how messed up every single person is, how you fail to measure up to what's right, and how the rest of the world and culture and governments fail to measure up to what's right. And that's where the need for mercy and grace comes in, And so, I think for Christians, that happened at the cross. Perfect justice, perfect mercy are met at the cross. And I think when it comes to history, explaining things, explaining that need that we all have, Christianity just, I think it answers those questions in the most satisfying way, and I think it produces an incredible level of joy that is very enriching to the lives of people who believe in it. I think the world being as dark a place as it is, and a place as full of suffering as it is, I think that the Christian religion, the beliefs surrounding Christianity, have done wonders to help people cope with and still find joy in just the horrific state of the world as it really is. I mean, we're so isolated from it here in America, but go anywhere else, China right now. I mean, Christianity is the fastest growing religion in communist China right now, where it's suppressed and fundamentalist versions of Christianity are made illegal. And Christianity has had this way of thriving under suffering and persecution that has caused it to propagate itself through the ages. And I think that is due to that unique peace that comes from having your need for justice and your need for mercy met in a very...
And how does Christianity address those things then? Through the story of Christ and
through the story of Christ. So I mean, Jesus on the cross was God's wrath against unrighteousness and evil being poured out on Jesus. And at the same time, it was this infinite mercy as Jesus was taking that wrath for all of us. It's like, it's this weird paradox. I mean, Christianity is full of paradoxes, you can only it's the only way for those things, to those two very important things to coexist peacefully, I think. Otherwise, you have people who gravitate towards the justice side, which, you take that all the way, it can make you a very miserable and angry person. And then, people maybe gravitate all the way more towards the mercy side, which causes them to make all kinds of allowances that they shouldn't make. I mean, you almost see it in the modern left and right. I think there is this sense of the right is the party of truth, and the left is the party of kind of libertarianism, mercy, compassion, and as
allowances, indulgences.
Exactly, and as that idea of grace and truth has split, you've kind of had this more polarization. Whereas I think historically, Christianity has done a great job of allowing those two things to coexist peacefully, because of how we see Jesus. So I think without Jesus, without that unification, that perfect unification of grace and truth, you do have this, depending on your personality type or your bent, you have these two types of people in the world. I'm probably more naturally, just my personality, I'm probably more of a truth person, and I have to work to try to allow for both and live in both. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well,
I hope I'm not.
I'm sure that as a father of almost 5 now, you've had plenty of opportunity to learn restraint and practice mercy, and also know where to draw the line and to keep the line, or else chaos will ensue.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fatherhood has taught me a lot about reality, about my God, about my relationship to the Father. I recommend becoming a parent for most people. It's a good thing.
So 2022 is still up for grabs. What's coming down the pike for you and for yours? Other than the child, Babylon Bee and your stuff, what's going on?
So this year we have the novel coming out, Postmodern Pilgrim's Progress, and then this fall we're releasing another Babylon Bee Guide to books. So last year we wrote the Babylon Bee Guide to Wokeness. This fall, a few months before the election, we're going to have the Babylon Bee Guide to Democracy. So it's going to be kind of a catch-all satire of kind of the left, the right, the corruption in government, corporations, big tech, the media, our whole apparatus that runs this whole thing.
I hope you guys take down us podcasters, and then there's the podcasters. What are we supposed to do with them?
Saving the world, 12-person audience.
We need to be regulated. I'll tell you.
Unfettered conversation. One of my favorites was the New York Times article about unfettered conversation. Like, what does that mean? You can have an unfettered conversation in a coffee shop. Like, what are you worried about?
Yeah, they were really worried about that.
Podcasts have been, the internet as a whole, and especially podcast, it's almost been kind of this, had a Gutenberg press effect almost. The Catholic Church is no longer the single source of truth anymore, and suddenly it's just anarchy. I mean, people can have conversations about anything anymore.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying about the Protestant Reformation, which rode the back on that thing that you guys invented at the Babylon Bee, called the printing press, right?
That was
what ensued from the printing press. I mean, just in England, they had an entire thing called the pamphlet wars, where people would actually be executed for printing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Oh yeah. Thankfully, we're not there yet,
Well, yeah, we don't know.
But it is interesting. There's a great kind of parallel to that in what is it? Red Cross. What are those tales? Those old chivalrous tales. that were written during that time. I'm going to look it up now.
Oh.
Red Cross. Oh, the Fairy Queen. There we go. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The Fairy Queen. There's this great moment in the story of the Knight Red Cross when he fights this monster called the Monster of Error, and it like reading it, you almost like it's like fake news. It's like he's battling this monster that spews forth ink like vomit. And then has all these little babies that drink up the vomit, and it's really gross, But he's painting this picture of kind of like where, like with the advent of the printing press, there's just all this error out there, and what are we going to do about the error? And the way that he kind of addresses this problem that they were facing back then, which is the same problem that we're having today, is that Red Cross is he wears the armor of God, and he's inoculated with truth. He knows the truth, and so error isn't a problem for him because he has taken the time to understand what's true and what's false, and I think the answer to misinformation or bad ideas out there is to keep yourself from being taken in is just to be, gosh, I don't want to falter here. I'm trying to say this right, but I think the censors. Okay, so the censors, they want to protect everyone from misinformation by censoring, by deplatforming. So that their version of the truth can be the standard. But if we instead create a society of people through training our kids, building strong families, a society of people that values
have an
truth,
internal moral compass.
Exactly, has an internal moral compass, guided by a desire for the truth, from my worldview, guided by Scripture. Misinformation is nothing to worry about because you're gonna have that internal compass to be able to discern fact from error. And for people without that assurance, it can be a very scary thing. So I don't know. I just think it's interesting. I think it's funny that a lot of these things that we're wrestling with today is exactly what they were wrestling with back then. There's nothing new under the sun. It's
what are you talking about? The iPhone 15 is just around the corner, man.
Yeah, and it's gonna require proof of vaccination to unlock it. So
okay. And track my eyes so I can watch all the adverts.
Yeah, that's right. So I think one thing that worries me a little bit is blockchain. I think blockchain is sold as this thing that's going to create a lot of freedom for people to interact and make transactions outside of the kind of the government and the systems. But I think that the only downside to that is what happens when the government seizes the blockchain and somehow or ties your citizenship or your human rights to giving them access to your blockchain information. That's where you get this the end times in Revelation. It talks about the mark of the beast being this thing that's put in your forehead or wrist that is required for you to buy or sell. I mean, that sounds like blockchain. If all your digital information, your medical history, your bank account is all contained in some kind of blockchain encrypted microchip that the government requires you to give them access to as a condition of citizenship, well, then it's all over. Then they control everything. They can cancel you. They can turn off your ability to do literally everything, interact in the world with a single switch. And so, I think that if technology is not going to save us, I think from totalitarianism, we still have to make the moral argument for freedom and preserve it and fight for it from from an intellectual level in order to preserve it. People have to understand and believe in the value of freedom. Otherwise, it won't persist. I mean, government's always going to find a way to seize it and control it.
Do you have a secret physical talent? Like, do you shred in the snow, or do you have a awesome hobby where not related to thinking through all this stuff?
Oh man,
I guess you probably have a trampoline and you just pitch your kids around. That might be a good sport.
Yeah, well, my daughters would tell you that I'm really good at playing Daddy Monster and Daddy Robot, sometimes Daddy Mountain. But I don't know. I play guitar. I sing a little bit. What else?
Do you have have you written a album for your kids album? Or write songs for your family?
No, I have. I make up silly stuff sometimes. The kids dance around too. I mean, a lot of my private life, my off time is wrapped up in the kids and the family. And I imagine that at some point in the future, when the kids are all gone, I'll pursue other things. But I really do enjoy like prop making stuff. I don't know, like have you seen Adam Savage, the guy that makes props for the movies? Yeah,
you just a mountain set. You just have like you have a like some sort of weird Kevin Costner dream where you're like, I need to build this 3-dimensional like tesseract and suspend it in Times Square or your town square. No,
I
or something
like
that.
Things. I like objects that could be used in props in movies. A few weeks ago, I had this
woodworking or paper mache.
I like woodworking. I like painting. Just a week ago, I had this sudden urge to paint a Nerf gun and make it look like a movie prop. Where is it here?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh no.
This is my happy place here. This is like when I want to relax. This was a.
Oh, that looks like something from RoboCop, man.
Yeah, see, it's a RoboCop gun. It used to be like orange and green, I like playing with like weathering techniques, making something look like it's made out of metal, and
interesting.
It's really nerdy stuff. It's like the guy in his basement with like the little magnifying glasses on his ears, painting little figurines. Like that's my secret like guilty nerd thing that if it were just me, I'd probably like be in some basement somewhere painting minifigures.
It sounds really meditative.
It is.
And plus all the fumes too. I mean, you can really just get out of your head there.
It's like peyote.
North American peyote. Paint the world. Well, Joel, thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure to speak with you and pick your brain about all the things you guys are doing over there at the Babylon Bee.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate you having me. I hope it gave you some stuff there to give to your audience. I probably rambled a little bit, but it was really fun.
We're okay with rambling around here.
You asked very good questions.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
I'm trying to weaponize them for the good, right?
Do you plan everything out ahead of time, or like how often do you find yourself kind of ad-libbing and kind of following up as opposed to going off of a script?
Hold on. I'm going to say goodbye to the audience and keep my secret sauce off camera.